I appreciate you making your way here through this beautiful summer evening. First of all, I'd like to thank the Lettrétage, I'm sure I say that horribly wrong, Lettrétage people. Tom, Katerina, Olivia at the bar, Malta, Antonia, for all their hard work and organization. And it's a pleasure to see you here. This is an amazing group of people. Like, if I was going to have a party, I would invite you people and record all you talking together. I'd like to, in lieu of program notes, in lieu of printing all the text so everybody can read and get the inner meaning of the poem by reading, I'd like to bring you into this project, into my world, not tell you how to interpret it, but bring you into it, why I'm doing this. Maybe that affects your listening. I grew up battling a thing called dyslexia. Dyslexia, as most of you probably know, is when you have trouble writing, you have trouble formulating sentences, maybe you read slow. Dyslexia shows up in different ways. Sometimes maybe you write things backwards. Writing things backwards is also a sign that you might be possessed by the devil. So you get away. If somebody says they're dyslexic, you got to check that out because it could be the other way. Is everybody okay with English here? Sind alle okay mit Englisch? Yeah, it's okay. Well, this is so mein Projekt. This is my project. It's very personal to me, so I prefer to talk about it in English, if that's okay. Yeah. So I've always wanted to read books, but for me to read a book, to read a whole book was like climbing a mountain. And I don't mean a little mountain like in Berlin. I'm from California. I mean like a big mountain. So that's how I found poetry interesting. It's not that I was young and thought, oh, poetry is amazing, it's beautiful, it's so inspiring. It's that I was young and I wanted to read a whole thing. It somehow that made sense. So, and poems were short. You can get through one during the lunch hour if you didn't have too many friends, which was to my advantage, apparently. So, and poetry also had this very complex, like a good movie, a very, how do you say it, komprimiert. What is that in English? Condensed, a very condensed thing in it, and a sonic element. Like every poem had its own sonic qualities, which I found cool. Another thing about poetry is that you could read a poem, even a short poem, and it was okay not to understand what it was about. And that was kind of cool. It was like a safe place to get lost. And I became a little bit addicted to that. After I started playing trumpet, I found out that playing trumpet and speaking were not that far apart. For example, I can sit on a word a long time and think, or I can just kind of babble. So I always felt like playing the trumpet had something to do with speaking. Then, as a newly born music nerd, I discovered an album called Such Sweet Thunder. Does anybody know this? From Duke Ellington. And Duke Ellington was commissioned by a Shakespeare festival in Canada. I think it was the Toronto Shakespeare Festival, to write a program based on Shakespeare poetry. And so you can hear a sonnet. What's that with five? And such, and he had a composition inspired by Ophelia and Hamlet. And so I love that, the fact that he combined the musical language of Shakespeare with his own jazz vocabulary. And I've always looked for that. Heiner Goebbels is a composer who combines music and sounds and speaking, a wonderful composer. Poetry became, like I said, a safe place to get lost, and almost, it was so important for me at one time. I think, what's that called? I think Foucault talks about a concept, heterotopia. Now, I'm not sure if this is interpreted right, but it's a kind of, Foucault talks about a place within a place. Like you could say, a small city built into Berlin, or a playground that has the thematic of a city in it, in the middle of a city, in the middle of a neighborhood, reflecting. So this place within a place, you could think of language as a kind of a landscape. And poetry, each poem connotates its own special language and its special sounds and special rhythms, its own world. And while going around recording poets, I think that's what I was looking for. The last month, I recorded quite a number of poets. This is part 2. What can I say? The first part was only compositions. And these compositions, I considered them like musical translations of the poems, not based on the words of the poet, but based on the voice of the poet. 2 of the poets actually told me, they said, "Oh, you're doing these musical translations of poems. You know what that is?" A silly idea. No, that's homophonic translations. Who is here is into homophonic translations? And so I learned a new word, homophonic translation. Homophonic translation. Homophonic translations. And that is when a poet translates a poem not by the words but the sound of the poem. So these musical translations are actually related to this great poetic tradition. Why is this live electronics? I'm ashamed. All the friends of mine who do live electronics, I did not invite them. Here's the last point, and then we'll get on to the show. When I went into the studio to mix the second round of these compositions, it was more fun to mix the music. It was more fun to mute a voice or make the piano or the bass suddenly really loud, or have the drums drown out the voice of the poet. And I thought, why not try to do that on stage? So if you really want to know, I am never nervous for a performance. Never. Haven't been for years. But this terrifies me because I practiced. I actually practiced. And I don't practice too much anymore. And by each practice, something went terribly wrong. And I thought, God, what if this happens on stage? And I thought, why don't I tell everybody that? So here we go. We're going to start out with a kind of an overture. Gregor Dotzauer, who wrote a wonderful book, which you can see here. This book is like a good friend talking to you in your favorite cafe, and you just keep ordering another wine or another snack, another beer, because you just want to hear more about his vision of music and sound in the city. And his portion of this piece, although it's not poetry, whatever poetry is, it's become a kind of an overture to this whole thing. So that's what we're going to start out hearing. Before the overture, we have a prelude. There's a poet from Belarus, Dmitri Strozew. And I was so inspired by his voice, because he doesn't speak his poems, he screams them and sings them. I'm gonna introduce this whole piece before the overture with a little improvisation based on Dmitri's voice. You need to know that you're not only going to hear the poems, but the voices of the poets throughout the whole piece are part of the musical landscape, are used as instruments. You know, with a sampler you can chop up, you can I don't want to. You can take want and stretch it, or you can say I really stupid, and you can take the st from stupid and create percussion out of it. So throughout the whole thing, the voices of all the poets in the project will be used as an instrument. Enjoy. Forgive me when something goes wrong.